safe travel.
Thank you. Your dad fell on his face like you were? Your dad fell on his face like you were?
Welcome everyone back to Theology on Tap. That was a bit of a trailer. We wanted to show a bit of a longer clip from a recent conference that happened in Rome just last year called Humanum. And that was the trailer of about a series of 6 episodes that spanned about 15 minutes each from this unprecedented interreligious conference that saw Pope Francis and about 400 leaders of different religious traditions speak and reflect on what their different faiths teach about marriage and the complementarity of man and woman. So that happened then, and the individual talks that took place at that conference, as well as the videos that were shown, of which this one was a trailer, have since then been watched by tens of thousands of people across the world. So we're pretty excited tonight to launch the book, which is itself the transcripts of the proceedings of that conference. So all of you should have a copy of that one and another book by Johann Christoph Arnold, God, Sex and Marriage. Both of these books have been made available free for any Theology on Tap attendee, thanks to Bill and Grace Weiser, who are a couple of our speakers here tonight. Please give them a warm thanks. Both of them form the pastoral team at the Bruderhof community here in Australia, and Bill himself is the managing editor of Plough, which is the publishing company that produced those books. So we're very, very grateful for him making all these books so generously available to everyone here tonight. We have a number of boxes still left on either side, so if you have a friend who you think might want one, or if you'd like to bring one home as well for someone else, feel free to take that on your way out. A couple of our guest speakers that we have here tonight, you all know quite well, a regular Theology on Tap attendee and the Catholic Archbishop of Sydney, Archbishop Anthony Fisher. He himself attended the conference in Rome last year, so we'll no doubt hear some of his experience of that. And we have Simon Smart, who's the Executive Director from the Centre for Public Christianity as well, just a couple of blocks away from here, so stone's throw away. Please make him feel very welcome. We did originally have as well Rabbi Gad Krebs, who's the head rabbi of the Catholic Synagogue in St Ives, but unfortunately he wasn't able to be here tonight, so he sends his apologies. So without further ado, we're going to jump straight into it. We're going to have a few brief presentations by all 3 of the different communities that are being represented here tonight, the Catholic community, the Anglican community, and the Anabaptist community. And then we'll have time for Q&A as well. So without further ado, I'd like to invite up the Archbishop to speak first, and Bill and Grace and Simon can also come up here as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Patrick, and thank you all for being here tonight. It's great to see you all again. I recently read about a teacher who got married in an American cathedral. Like most brides, she ummed and ahed endlessly about her bridal gown before choosing a long white gown and a long white veil covering her head to toe and nude-coloured shoes. What was different from other weddings was that she wasn't marrying your average bloke. She was marrying Christ. That day, she became one of about 3,500 consecrated virgins around the world, and 750,000 nuns around the world who pledged lifelong virginity while praying for the world and engaging in many ministries. Now, you might say that's a rather crazy start to an evening reflecting on male-female complementarity and its implications for marriage. But it seems to me the question of male and female is not just one for married people, or could be married people, or will one day be married people, but for every human being. We've all got to get a handle on our own sexual identity if we're to know how to live that dimension with sexual integrity or chastity, and to integrate our sexual life into the rest of our vocation. The teacher bride, in this case Jessica Hayes, wanted to be a bride to Christ in a mystical sense. But the very idea would be nonsense if she and we didn't know that there's a difference between man and woman, and that they usually couple in a special way we call marriage. It wouldn't make sense without a clear sense of her own sexual identity and the importance of healthy relationships, either with the opposite sex or with your own. Many other things, I think, about our culture, its arts, its history, its institutions, many things about our world only make sense if you understand that. Marriage is just one of them, but a very important one at that. Well, last year I was installed as Archbishop of Sydney, and I immediately fled the scene. Less than 3 days later, I was in Rome for the Humanum conference that you've just seen a trailer for. I'd agreed long before, more than a year before, that I would take part in this conference, little knowing what a terrible thing was about to happen to my life. It was a truly significant gathering. There are many different perspectives to be heard and were heard there on the fundamental fact of human life, which drives and makes intelligible so much of human behaviour. That we are created by God, male and female. That this male-female difference is the basis of the physical and emotional and spiritual union of opposites called marriage, and the consequent fruitfulness so important for our church and our society. Sex on this account, male and femaleness on this account, are not just an optional extra like air conditioning in the car. Maleness and femaleness runs very deep to who we are, how we see the world, how we relate to others. There's plenty of room for variation, various kinds, different cultures, different individuals, but it's fundamental that there is this difference, fundamental to understanding things then like marriage and lots else besides. Now, I've been to lots of Vatican conferences over the years, and frankly, they're often not much chop. They're not what we'd be looking for in a conference. A series of ecclesiastical peacocks go across the stage, do their thing, and go off the stage. No questions are asked, no discussion is invited. You get about 20 of them in a row, your head is spinning by the end of the day, then they call for cappuccino. And that's called a conference. This one was really different. And it was different for a number of reasons. One was that Pope Francis was there. And he is a remarkable religious figure in our world today, and clearly has quite an effect when he appears at a conference. Next conference you organise, I'd recommend you try and get him there. The second thing that was unusual about this conference was there were speakers and participants from many different religious traditions. From the many different Christian traditions. I remember I had beside me for much of the conference Archbishop Peter Jensen, the former Anglican Archbishop of Sydney, taking part in this conference. And there were all sorts of people from all around the world, not just Christians, but also Jews and Muslims and others too. All of them, what united them was that they believed maleness and femaleness matter. And they matter especially for marriage. And to be honest with you, many of the best speakers were the non-Catholic ones. I remember, I think the Jewish rabbi from England, Jonathan Sacks, was outstanding. There was an evangelical woman, Jacqueline Rivers, who I thought was outstanding. The Catholics did okay too, but there was lots of different faith perspectives there, and some of them, though different to mine, had a lot to teach me. A third thing that really struck me about that conference was it had these really clever video clips at the beginning of each session. It was really trying to use the new media in interesting ways to inform our conference and get our discussion going. And I've never had anything like that in the Vatican. Usually, the Vatican high-tech means a biro instead of a quill. But these guys had really thought through how to engage us, and I'd really commend to you to search, to Google Humanum and have a look at those videos. We were going to look at one of them tonight, but I ran out of time, but I'd really recommend them to you as something I know, once you've seen one, you'll probably want to see them all and share them with people too. The fourth thing about it was there was a really good discussion. After every session, during every session, we had lots of time to ask questions, to discuss, to argue, to hear different perspectives, and I found that very enriching. And finally, one of the best things of all is all the papers are now available in a book for you tonight, thanks to these guys beside me. And that's a really great gift to us, and I really would recommend them to you to have a good look at them. I think you'll really find them helpful. Pope Francis, who spoke there at the conference, has spent much of the last year catechising us and the world about maleness, femaleness, marriage, family. He's set up that extraordinary synod we had last year after a consultation with the bishops and Christian people around the world. Then there's another one this year in October. So they're kind of bookends. Again, there's been a consultation locally throughout the world to get people thinking about marriage, to get people thinking about things like maleness and femaleness and relationships, commitment, self-sacrifice, children, all those different sides, dimensions to marriage and family life, and some of the real challenges of living that today and understanding that today and sharing that, celebrating that today. I think that the biggest challenge for this synod coming up is the challenge for us of learning again how to love. I think there's lots of talk about love, endless love songs and love talk. But the fact is, modernity has forgotten how to love. But many of the absolutely crucial aspects to make a long-lasting relationship work, we just seem to have lost grip on them. And we're really finding it hard to love well over the long haul in modernity. But there's plenty of the kind of warm and fuzzy, sentimental Valentine's Day kind of love talk. But what we really need is to learn again the self-sacrificing Easter Day kind of love. And so I think that is, from my point of view, the biggest challenge for this synod. It's not all the headline grabbers that the newspapers want us to talk about. It's something much deeper. It goes right to the heart of the crucial vocation of every human being, the vocation to love. Nearly done. Patrick's watching the time. The Pope will also be going to the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia just later this month. You would have heard he's going to the UN and he's going to address the US Congress. The media don't tend to mention the real reason he's going to America at all, and that's for the World Meeting with Families. It's like World Youth Day, but for families. And you get hundreds of thousands of people, families, together, celebrating, talking about things, talking about the gifts, talking about the challenges of family life today, and then celebrating their faith and family life with the Pope, with a big mass at the end. In preparation for that big meeting, as well as the synods past and coming, the Pope's been saying some very important things about our maleness and femaleness, about that male-female relationship, of complementarity. It was in his recent encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si. Very interesting things about this topic in there, as in other places over this past year. It's very countercultural in some ways. In societies where sexuality is seen as optional and infinitely flexible, and irrelevant really to institutions like marriage and family. So tonight I'd encourage you, open your minds and hear these different perspectives from different faith traditions tonight, but that are united in thinking actually maleness and femaleness do matter quite a lot, and they matter in their complementarity in marriage as well as in other parts of life. A thought that unites all the world's great religions, all of whom agree the complementarity of male and female, of man and woman, isn't just good, it isn't just useful because it passes on genes in certain ways through next generation and makes for interesting art and other things. It's not just good, it's not just useful, it is beautiful and it deserves to be reverenced and to be celebrated. Great to see you all here tonight. Thank you.
Well, it's indeed a privilege and honour to be able to test another one of Sydney's pubs tonight. Actually, when Grace and I first set eyes on this gentleman over here, two people to my right, I said, this lad's probably good for a good deal of mischief. And I sort of envisioned something like this. So here we are tonight. You know, there's that book, Everything I Learned in Kindergarten. Everything that Patrick ever learned, he learned in New York City when he was interning there. And probably if I'd have known who to look for, I would have seen him in Annie Moore's or the Pig and Whistle on 2nd Avenue and 50th. Though our paths only met here first in Australia, so it's beautiful to be here. When Pastor Arnold, who is the author of the book, Sex, God and Marriage, married us in 1986, that's Grace and myself, we never thought that 29 years later we would be launching his book, Sex, God and Marriage, in partnership with a Catholic Archbishop and an Anglican at Theology on Tap yet. Nor would even the most visionary 16th century Anabaptist ever envision a book containing a statement co-signed by a Bruderhof pastor and a cardinal. And that's in the back of the book, don't miss it. Cardinal Timothy Dolan is a really good friend of ours, and you'll see his signature back there. Much less the author addressing an international colloquium alongside the Pope. After all, thousands of Anabaptists were persecuted in their day. But here is the indisputable evidence, not just good, but beautiful. Such is the wonderful working of the Holy Spirit. The fact is that our church has never disagreed over this evening's topic, and it is indeed an honor to be with you all today and to sit with this panel as witness to the complementarity of man and woman, which brings me back to our marriage.
I would just like to tell you that the two of us attended the same schools, so we were acquainted, and in about year 8, had anyone suggested to my husband that he was going to marry me, Bill would have given them a good punch in the nose. No way, it really would. So obviously God has been doing a bit of work in the meantime. Seriously though, I have come to appreciate even more with the passage of time that our complementarity is not limited to the obvious physical differences. Indeed, these are simply the outward expression of deeper realities. My husband Bill has led and guided me closer to Christ and has been a pillar of support through the hard times, and there have been these, as well as immeasurable joy through these 29 years.
And for my part, I love and value Grace more each year as a special gift from God, just because we are so different. In our church youth group, I knew her first as a young woman dedicated to Christ. Since our marriage, I've marveled at the inner beauty that has unfolded and deepened with the birth and nurture of each of our 5 children. A woman's nature is to gather and protect those souls within her care, whereas a man's nature is more to bring others who may be outside this circle into its warmth. Inasmuch as I did the latter, looking back, I wish I'd been more sensitive to her desire that I spend more time with the children when they were young. After all, we never get a second chance. I've seen her faith and fortitude tested by a cancer diagnosis, and together we weathered the incarceration of a son. And after years of prison ministry, I found myself outside a federal prison, visiting not someone else's son, but my own. These things are supposed to happen to other people. But now we look forward to the blessing of our first grandchild. And over the years, I've come to understand better than at first that it is truly not good for man to be alone. And I don't just mean her knack for finding important pieces of paper I seem to keep losing around the house. We are part of the Bruderhof of Anabaptist Church, in which we hold all things in common in the manner of the early Christians, as recorded in Acts 2 and 4. For us, following Christ means exactly that, a 24/7 lifelong commitment to discipleship, not unlike the Catholic religious orders, and much like the Focolare movement or San Egidio that some of you may know. And like many of the orders, we are not cloistered, but engage constantly with the world around us as we are this evening. And like many of the religious orders, we have immense joy in our calling, in our vocation.
With this in mind, it is no surprise that Pastor Arnold's contribution at the Humanum colloquium placed the faithful love of one man and one woman for life within the context of the body of believers. I will quote, "Marriage is more than a private contract between two people. God did not have in mind merely the personal happiness of separate individuals, but the establishment of God-fearing relationships in a communion of families under His rulership. If we want strong marriages, we need to build faithful communities dedicated to living out Jesus' teachings of chastity, forgiveness, and sharing. This means couples as well as single men and women who demonstrate what it means to be true disciples of God. In my own church community, there are people from all walks of life, including some from very broken families. Like couples everywhere, couples in our church have to work hard to nurture the kind of love that truly lasts. Sometimes they find themselves in crisis, but through the help of God and of fellow church members, miracles of reconciliation and healing can and do happen. Prayer is a crucial part of this process. As we ourselves can attest, prayer and the surrounding love and support of brothers and sisters can carry a marriage through all that life brings.
That we have gathered here this evening can only be ascribed to prayer and to the grace of God's reconciling and forgiving love. And any of you who don't believe that, just look at the history over the 500 years, and particularly what was happening in the 16th century. But it's also an attribute to the work and vision of those who have paved the way. When in 1995, Pastor Arnold sent a copy of his book to his friend Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, the now Pope Emeritus thanked him for the book's biblical message, writing that, quote, "Such conviction will inevitably arouse hatred and even persecution." And I remember thinking at the time, hatred, persecution? I mean, that's over the top. I mean, this was 1995. How wrong I was. But let us not be discouraged today. A solid majority in this world understands the reality and beauty of the complementarity of man and woman. And I firmly believe that many who would so quickly and gushingly replace this reality and embrace other pseudo-realities will come to see that the emperor has no clothes. Indisputably, there is only one construct by which children are raised by their biological parents. That is, within the bond between a man and a woman. Nothing can or will ever change this unique bond that I call marriage. Upholding this construct has nothing to do with prejudice or discrimination. Humans, after all, did not invent this good and beautiful reality, nor can they change it. It is simply there, by the grace and design of a loving God. And so no doubt there are tough times ahead. But think about this. Was it really any different for the early church? This is no time for silence. Even within the brief span of our own church history of about 100 years, the Bruderhof held beliefs deemed to be incompatible with the zeitgeist of National Socialism. In an attempt to silence them, the Nazis first forbade the sale of their Christian books. Plough Publishing was going at that time. When that and other economic measures failed, the Gestapo finally surrounded the church community, imprisoned 3 of its members, and expelled the rest with what they could carry on their backs. We are here today to testify to God's plan, even though, once again, it is increasingly deemed to be incompatible with the prevailing zeitgeist. For 2,000 years, Christians have believed that the only place for sex is in a marriage covenant between one man and one woman for life. We are here to proclaim this liberating truth and to call all believers to live out the gospel generously, joyfully, wholeheartedly, and without fear. And a couple of those sentences come from this article you can pick up in the back, No Time for Silence, which includes a piece by one of our members who is a First Amendment lawyer commenting on the implications of the recent Supreme Court case in the United States. So then, what better way to end than with these beautiful lines with which Pastor Arnold closed his Humanum address. Let us hold our heads high, knowing that if God is for us, who can be against us? Let us give living witness together that God's plan for marriage and children is joyful, true, and everlasting. Nothing will be able to stop us from proclaiming this childlike and simple message. It is God who holds the final hour of history in His hands, and He will be victorious.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Grace and Archbishop. It's good to be here with you all. I'll try and sort of swivel a bit so I can see some of you over this side. Thanks, Patrick, for hosting us here as well. It's great to be with you all. As Patrick mentioned, I'm from the Centre for Public Christianity in Sydney. Centre for Public Christianity is a media company that seeks to promote the public understanding of the Christian faith. I hope you'll check it out, publicchristianity.org, and get some value from the material there. I happen to be Anglican as well, so I'm just sort of doing this as a kind of the Anglican here. Nice of you to have me along. 2 years ago, I wrote a book with 2 atheists and a Muslim. The book was called For God's Sake, and it was a kind of extended discussion of our different key worldview questions from our different perspectives. Now we launched this book in Glebe in the inner west of Sydney, which according to the census is the most secular part of Sydney. It was launched by Peter Fitzsimons, who many of you will know is the sort of rather intimidating ex-Australian rugby player. He's about the size of a door, and he's also a very evangelistic atheist. Now, on the night, we reckon there was about 96% of the audience were probably atheist. The Muslim woman who was meant to be on the panel with us couldn't come, so I was the only one who believed anything. Anyway, there we were. I was looking around the crowd, sort of scattered in the crowd with sympathetic friends of mine looking like I was about to be skewered. And, I couldn't see my wife because her head was buried in her hands. She had similar fears for me. It seems a slightly more encouraging crowd tonight. But early on in the night, Peter Fitzsimons turned to me and he said, "Now, Simon, from what I remember of religious studies class at school, Christianity is more or less about if you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. Now, is that a kind of reasonable summary of the faith? And I said, no, that's about as bad as wrong as you could be, and perhaps you should have paid more attention even when you just to which he replied, well, I got 49% and I've been taking my revenge ever since. And I thought, well, fair enough. Now, I tell that story to illustrate the fact that some of what we're talking about here is a great challenge when you want to talk about it in public. Now, it's one thing to talk among friends who think similarly, but this is a very foreign way of understanding the world to many people these days. And so it becomes incredibly challenging to offer a Christian perspective on all sorts of things in contemporary life. And it's a kind of a view that needs translating, I think, these days, in a way that perhaps even 20 or 30 years ago it didn't. Christians can no longer assume a shared framework of understanding the world, or even a shared language when it comes to talking about important issues of contemporary life. So I just mentioned that at the beginning because I think it's important. And as I think about that, part of what I want to do is talk about the way in which the Christian understanding of what it is to be a human being is such a beautiful and kind of lofty vision that many people wouldn't imagine is the case. So Jews and Christians, of course, understand creation itself to be a gift. So there's incredible affirmation of the physicality of life within the Christian understanding of things, and in a way that is not true of every system of thought. It certainly wasn't true of the world into which Christianity was born in the first century. This kind of incredible affirmation of the physicality of things. There's a great celebration within the Jewish and Christian scriptures for texture and colour and taste and some of the good stuff of life that we're enjoying here tonight. There's a real affirmation of those things. And that includes things like music and literature and art. And it also includes sexuality and sex. The picture here is one of sexuality being an incredible gift of creation and of the created order. But I reckon if you went out onto the street and asked someone what they imagine Christianity wants to tell us about this topic, it would be a very different answer that you might get to the one you're getting tonight, the one we want to talk about tonight. I would imagine that people would either be completely unaware of what the vision might be of the complementarity of men and women, or just assume that Christianity would be sort of uninterested in this topic, or perhaps fearful of the body and not wanting to talk about it. I kind of find this a little bit unpleasant to talk about. When it comes to sexuality between men and women relating to one another, that Christians would be mostly interested in a set of rules, a set of sort of do's and don'ts, and I imagine that people might think that this list of rules is kind of oppressive and not life-giving. Do you think that might be true? I think it's probably true as you go out into the street. And it's worth saying that some people have good reason for imagining that that's what Christians think, because that has been their experience of Christians and Christian institutions. And I think that's worth mentioning at the beginning. And it's one of the reasons why I'm really glad to have heard about this conference, to have seen the book that was given birth to this book from this conference, and have this sort of discussion that we're having tonight. I think it's really worth taking a moment, whether you're a believer or not, to pause and understand what the Christian vision of the human person is and why it's such a positive one. We can start right at the beginning. I love the early chapters of Genesis that lay out for us in a beautifully poetic form the nature of the universe, the nature of God, and our who we are as human beings, and therefore what our task as being a human person is. And in chapter 1, as you remember, quite early on, we get this stunning claim that every single one of us is made in the image of God. Male and female, he created them, as this sort of capturing something of the image of God there. Every one of us is a precious child of God. And we're male and female as well. This is a really important part of this. And so in this picture that we get of a pre-fall state, the state that we get is what is in this sort of relationship between men and women, you get what I would call a kind of radical mutuality. It's a really stunning, you can read over it too quickly, the stunning picture of togetherness and of harmony between men and women. It's a beautiful picture of wholeness as well, where one needs the other, and there's a sense of being incomplete without the other. And you remember that line that says they were naked and they felt no shame, meaning they're not afraid of each other. They are completely safe to be who they are before the other. What is in view here is a kind of sexual differentiation but togetherness. I think it's quite stunning. Now, when we think about how this might apply to any of our lives, broadly speaking, most of us can think of ways in which, and we've experienced ways in which, there's a kind of genius to the way males and females can interact and be together. They bring something special and unique and different to the table. Now, one kind of weekend trip away with the boys on a surf weekend, as I occasionally do, will tell you something about this, right? It's good fun for a weekend, but you kind of get the feeling that this is probably not meant to go for much longer than that. That things will come on, unstuck pretty quickly. Women and girls might think something about the same if it was them going away together. I mean, some of the things that we might talk about there are sort of the way we sort of do well together. Become more kind of acutely the case in marriage and family. My little, he was 11-year-old son, he was about 8 or 9 when he said this to me. He sort of laughed at me one day and said, Dad, you wouldn't make a very good mum. Now, I'd like to think that he meant something more than just whatever roles we've kind of divided up in terms about the way we've organised our lives. I think he was talking about something essential that was going on there. And see, at its best, marriage can fulfil what's most positive about the differentiation between the sexes. Now, it's important to note, and the most obvious thing, that we live in a sort of post-fall time, and that there's a sort of calamitous effects of this, and that this vital connection that we describe in those early chapters is damaged and imperfect and difficult. There's one or two of you here tonight who know this, right? You sense the sort of the struggle that we have together. Many relationships, many marriages don't last. Many, I'd say most, perhaps all, that do go through incredible challenges along the way. That's going to be, you can promise people that. We're no longer naked and unashamed. We hold things from each other. We're afraid to be totally ourselves. We guard ourselves from injury. We're kind of wounded and wounding people. We inflict damage on one another. And it takes incredible kind of persistence, incredible forgiveness to do well over the long term. And you see, in film and television and literature these days, sitcoms, marriage has kind of become a bad joke. It's like the point at which any enjoyment in life ends. And you're left with this very negative picture of marriage today. But I would say that even the most cynical among us recognise the beauty and what's precious about a marriage that outlasts the difficult times and that sticks with it with the commitment and sort of picks up on some of the language that the Apostle Paul writes about in Ephesians, of that stuff where, the idea of the husband sacrificially laying down his life so that his wife can flourish, putting his needs and wants aside and looking more to her. It's easy to talk about, harder to do. It's the idea that he's going to lift her up and allow her to flourish. The idea of the wife and the husband working together, which in many cases might mean that it's the husband who's doing the school lunches, right, before work. They're creating a place of safety for each other, but also for other people around them, and a place where people can flourish, especially children who might come into their care. And they're picking up on that sort of the language of 1 Corinthians 13 that's so popular at weddings. There's no surprise why that is. That idea of a love that's patient, love that's kind, that's never keeping a record of wrongs. I think that's a stunning challenge. Never keeping a record of wrongs. Always protecting and trusting and hoping and persevering. And I love the community aspect of this too. There's a reason why traditionally people get married in front of all their friends. There's this sense that the marriage is not only for the two people involved or even for the children that might come into their lives, but it's for the there's a way in which they kind of can be a blessing to the community. And it's one of the reasons why a break in marriage is such a tragedy. It affects so many people in so many different ways. I think that Christianity offers a very deep, a profound reason to strive for, to hope in the kind of complementary relationship that, according to this way of thinking, according to the kind of biblical tradition, is that it's woven into the fabric of creation itself. We might talk about that as we get into question time, perhaps. It's a really lofty vision that all of us fall short of, for sure. But properly understood, I think it's one that we do well to understand and to be challenged by and aspire to. It might be a foreign-sounding idea to lots of people today, but it's worth spending the time trying to explain what we mean by it and why it's a gift and a really positive thing for all people in our society, in the common, serving the common good.